especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, I've got to say, it's not going to surprise you to learn that actually the House of Lords have just voted against the government's Rwanda bill. Let's face it, it's become a bit of a farce now, all this, hasn't it? So we'll be explaining what's just happened, what might happen next, and asking you, what do you think should happen next? Also, George Galloway today, of course, has been sworn in as the MP. I can tell you, right, it's sent so many people into an absolute frenzy. Are you one of them? Also, proposals now suggest that MPs should be banned from engaging with protest groups such as Palestinian Solidarity Campaign and Just Stop Oil as examples. Is that the right approach or not? Also, Michael Gove, he has been asked to update the definition of extremism. What should be included in that definition? And of course, it's budget week this week. What do you want to see in it? Yes, indeed. So we're going to debate all of that and more in the next hour. But before we do, let's cross live to Polly Middlehurst for tonight's latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story today is that the Prime Minister has suffered a second defeat to the Rwanda bill at the hands of the House of Lords today. They backed by 282 to 180 on a demand that Parliament can't declare Rwanda to be a safe country until the treaty is with promised safeguards and is fully implemented that way. It comes after the first blow, which saw a majority of 102 peers back a motion to ensure his Safety of Rwanda bill is fully compliant with the law. So nearly 50 amendments have so far been put forward and are being voted on this evening and on Wednesday. Full coverage right here, GB News. Meanwhile, GB News understands around 330 migrants have been intercepted crossing the English Channel today in 6 small boats. That's after 327 made the crossing yesterday. The same day, a 7-year-old girl died after her boat capsized. She'd been travelling with her pregnant mother, her father and 3 siblings when the boat got into difficulty in the early hours of yesterday morning. Now, the Chancellor has said he wants to move the UK to a lower taxed economy, but will only do so in a responsible way. Jeremy Hunt made the comments while visiting a new digital engineering plant in Wiltshire, where he also announced a £360 million funding boost for manufacturing. Income tax has reached a historic high, and while promising some tax cuts, the Chancellor has also been trying to temper expectations ahead of Wednesday's budget.
Wants to move to a lower taxed economy, but we're only going to do so in a way that is responsible and recognises that there are things that taxes pay for, that we couldn't cut taxes by borrowing. We'll do so in a responsible way, but if we can spend money on public services more efficiently, then that will mean less pressure on taxpayers.
Well, the former Home Secretary Dame Priti Patel told GB News the government also needs to be more efficient when it comes to its spending.
Over 500,000 civil servants. Now, even to shave a degree off that would cut public expenditure by at least £1 billion, and that would be great. Back again in 2010, 2016, we had under, I think, around 400,000 civil servants, and that saved a significant amount of money. The spending, the costs alone, I think, came down to something like £11 billion. This is where we have to be again, to be an agile government that's fit in the sense of financially sound money, conservative principles, but actually making sure the public keep more of their money.
Well, newly elected Rochdale MP George Galloway has been sworn into Parliament today.
Almighty God, that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
Well, as you're hearing, the Workers' Party of Britain leader pledging allegiance to the King as part of that ceremony. He was also accompanied by Alba Party MP Neil Hanvey and Conservative MP Sir Peter Bottomley, the father of the House. Mr Galloway won last week's Rochdale by-election by more than 5,500 votes.
Stand at a very dangerous crossroads in our country's affairs, perhaps as dangerous as any since the summer and autumn of 1940, 41, and there's no Mr Churchill in this picture. There's no one, it seems, able to step forward and steady the ship of state and begin to rally, unite our people to face what is a very difficult future.
Well, to the United States now, where Donald Trump has cleared another hurdle in his bid for the US presidency after a Supreme Court victory today. The ruling means the Republican candidate will appear on the ballot in Tuesday's Colorado primary. The justices unanimously reversed a decision by Colorado's top court to exclude him from the ballot following accusations about his involvement in the Capitol riots in 2021. Speaking in Palm Beach, Florida, Donald Trump thanked the Supreme Court for the important decision and blamed political motivation.
Essentially, you cannot take somebody out of a race because an opponent would like to have it that way. The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly, but a court shouldn't be doing that, and the Supreme Court saw that very well. And I really do believe that will be a unifying factor, because while most states were thrilled to have me, there were some that didn't, and they didn't want that for political reasons. They didn't want that because of poll numbers, because the poll numbers are very good. We're beating President Biden in almost every poll.
For the latest stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello there, thanks for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, my panel, our PR consultant Alex Dean and the broadcast journalist Judita De Silva. Good evening.
Good evening to you.
Of you. You know the drill as well, Date, on this programme. It's not just about us three. It's very much about you guys at home as well. What's on your mind tonight? There's so much I want to get into with you again. Quite a crazy day in British politics. What are you making to all of this? George Galloway, he's been sworn in as well. I'm telling you, he has sent people into an absolute frenzy. What do you make to all the goings on there? Things like conversation talking about the word extremism now. Apparently that definition needs to be expanded. What should that definition look like? What should it include? So I want your thoughts on all of that. All the usual ways. gbviews@gbnews.com is how you email me, or you can tweet or X me at GBNews. Just a polite reminder as well, what's really important to me on this programme, as you all know as regular viewers, is we do robust, respectful debate on this programme. So if you hear anything or see anything, quite frankly, that you disagree with, that's great, that's fine. That is the nature of debate. But please, can I just ask that if Alex, for example, is talking nonsense, as he frequently does, can we make it about the sentiment, the opinion, and not the person, if indeed that is OK with you? So polite, respectful debate is what we like here. And shall we get straight into the top story then? Another big day for the government. It's not a good day for I was about to say for any of them, but particularly for Rishi Sunak. Big votes taking place on the Rwanda bill over in the House of Lords. Shall we cross live now to Olivia Utley to bring us up to speed with exactly what's been going on? Olivia, for those people that don't kind of eat and breathe and sleep this kind of stuff, just a reminder as to what the plan for today was supposed to be and how it's been going so far.
Well, as you say, Michelle, it's all pretty complicated. The Rwanda bill was voted through in the state that the government tabled it in the Commons a few weeks ago. It's now going through the House of Lords. And on the whole, the House of Lords is essentially a little bit more left-wing than the House of Commons. The Conservative Party does not have an overall majority in the House of Lords, and Conservative peers tend to be a bit more on the left.
My lords,
than their counterparts in the Commons. So what we were expecting to see today, and what indeed we have seen, is the Lords essentially attempting to water down the Rwanda bill. And there were 50 different amendments to the Rwanda bill tabled by various peers. 5 of them have been selected today, and at the moment the peers are voting on them. Now, just about half an hour ago, the House of Lords defeated the government on one amendment. This was an amendment tabled by Lord Goldsmith's former Labour Attorney General, and essentially that amendment said that the Rwanda bill could only go through if it was seen to be compatible with international law. Now, we know that as it stands, it's believed that the Rwanda bill is not compatible with international law. So essentially that amounts to the House of Lords defeating the government's Rwanda plan. Now, in the last 5 minutes or so, another amendment has just gone through, and this is the one which says that Rwanda will only be designated a safe country when Rwanda makes specific changes to its own immigration policy. Now, the Rwandan government have promised to make these changes to its own immigration system, but they haven't yet been implemented. So basically, what that amendment is trying to do is to slow everything down, meaning that it would be very unlikely that the Prime Minister could get flights off the ground to Rwanda before the next election. Now, they're voting on yet another amendment in the next few minutes, and we'll have the result of that soon. But essentially, what the House of Lords is trying to do here is to water down this legislation in as many ways as possible. Now, actually, Michelle, that doesn't really matter that much in the long run, because this legislation will go back to the House of Commons in a thing known as parliamentary ping pong, and the House of Commons, it is thought, where there is a government majority, will just vote down all of the amendments that the Lords have tabled. So why does it matter? Well, optically, it's not very good. Rishi Sunak is already a weak Prime Minister. Look at where he is in the polls. And having the House of Lords vote against him on this flagship bit of legislation, and with such enormous defeats, there were 274 to 172, I think, for the First Amendment, is a very bad look indeed. The other thing, of course, is that it really slows things down for the government. Rishi Sunak is desperate to get those flights going, and the longer this takes going through the Lords and then the Commons and then back to the Lords, the more amendments that there are, the less likely it is that this Rwanda plan will actually be implemented before an election.
Well, interesting stuff. Olivia, you're going to stay across that for us, so we'll bring you up to speed, viewers and listeners, with the goings-on as they happen. Alex Dean, what do you make to the goings-on?
Well, I think Olivia put her finger on the most important aspect for the government in the end, which is the timing, because the peers who are mounting this opposition to the government's agenda freely acknowledge, as they should and must, that ultimately the Commons can and will have its way. That is to say that the unelected House ultimately gives way to the elected House on issues, especially of manifesto commitments and government pledges. And as she also says, the government has a majority in the Commons and can vote down their amendments. But the Lords can certainly slow things down. And that's what they are doing now, and as is their right. They're entitled to examine the legislation the government puts forward and interrogate it. So in the end, the government will have their way, but it makes it less likely that the Prime Minister makes his spring commitment for flights to Rwanda, and indeed it makes it less likely that you see meaningful flights to Rwanda or anywhere else before the general election. I think there's one other point that I think is quite interesting, not exactly to do with what you're mentioning, but if you look at the breakdown of the numbers of how people voted here, if the crossbenchers had voted the other way, the government would have won, which is it doesn't matter for these votes, but it does matter if Labour wins the next election, because it suggests that if Labour is going to deliver a big tranche and big changes in the upper house, they're going to need new peers. They're going to have to make up new members of the upper house. At the moment, Labour's position has been very sceptical about the House of Lords. They've flirted with abolishing it in some of their conversations in fringe meetings at their party conference. They've talked about making it smaller. Those are reasonable ambitions for a political party to have, but in the immediate term, pragmatically, they're going to have to make it larger.
I can tell you now, I can hear you on your surfers groaning at that suggestion, because already people have been getting in touch with me saying, Michelle, they're out of touch, close down the House of Lords, they're all unelected, it needs serious reform. So I bet you are not very keen on Alex's suggestion.
It's not my suggestion, it's just the parliamentary maths.
I was just about to say it, albeit one that I suspect will come true to detail. What do you make to it all?
I think that it's quite fascinating that there's a certain aspect to the whole conversation that isn't being addressed, that why is this overall so difficult? And I think that it's the byproduct of an established perception that has been perpetuated by Western media for decades. Because how do you now have the salvation or the silver bullet or the glory solution be a country that decades has been painted to the perception of the general British public as impoverished, dangerous, bruised, battered. The people there are barely clinging to a civilized form of existence. But now that's the country that you send people to for a better life. Now you have to think about the kinds of conversations about Africa, about the Middle East, about the Far East that are established and perpetuated through media that give the people a perception of those countries that they might never visit. So now when you posit them in a position that is completely antithetical to what you have previously established, it's going to be problematic. And so you can't make people see it a different way, having told them it's one way for so long.
I mean, there'll be people...
I think that's fair criticism, by the way.
Yeah, there'll be people shouting at the screens about, and I do get my football teams mixed up. Was it Arsenal? Is it Arsenal?
I don't know what you were about to say yet.
They have to visit Rwanda. They're sponsored by the Rwandan Tourist Board. Many people will have gone to Rwanda and not think it's this kind of, awful environment. But I think it might be fair criticism, but it's about technicalities, isn't it? One of the reasons that people are saying, or that those in power are saying it's not safe, is one of the reasons that they're having this secondary treaty that comes along and tries to support the notion that actually it is safe. Many people will say, well, hold on a second, because the UN, I'm sure it's the UN, they send people to Rwanda, refugees to Rwanda already, so they would argue that the unsafeness is just technicality.
In fairness to those people, they would point to the technicalities of the different schemes requiring different, having different requirements. But both the European Union and all members thereof and the United Nations at different times have sent people seeking asylum or refugee status elsewhere. That's true. But I would make I thought the point about the way that we talk about countries like Rwanda was fair. So I wanted to make a different point about what the expectation is here, because the Supreme Court never said, we are sure that Rwanda is not safe. They said, we need to be sure that it is safe, and you need to offer us the following things. And the government said, well, we knew what we were doing, we've got this right. But one of the amendments, and one of the reasons the government's having difficulty here, is the so-called principle of so-called non-refoulement. That is sending somewhere where they run the risk of being sent on somewhere else. So it's Rwanda's own asylum or refugee policy that is causing some concern.
Indeed. There's been an update over in the House of Lords. Let's cross back to Olivia Utley for that latest. Olivia? What can you tell us?
Just hearing that Amendment 7 is now going through the House of Lords, and it's expected that there's going to be another government defeat there. Amendment 7 is explaining how Rwanda can only be deemed a safe country, as Alex was saying there, once the specific treaties have been put into place. Rwanda has promised to shake up its own asylum system, but there is a danger that if Rwanda fails to do that, then there will be a principle of international law will be broken, because migrants who were sent to Rwanda could end up being sent on somewhere where they are no longer safe. Now, we've had a vote on that. The government has been defeated on that. There is now an amendment saying that treaty that Rwanda is saying that it will implement to toughen up its own immigration policies, so to stop anyone being deported illegally to another country. The amendment being voted on now, the government would be forced to check every 3 months that Rwanda is actually sticking to its word, and it is remaining loyal to the treaty that it has signed. So this would be a real nail in the government's coffin, as it were. As I say, though, none of this matters too much in the long run, because the government will eventually be able to vote all of these amendments down, and we are expecting that they will manage to do that in a couple of weeks' time. But it doesn't look good, and it is very bad for timing. The government is desperate to get these flights going. The longer this all takes, if they have to sign off an amendment saying that they have to check in with Rwanda every 3 months, then that would be really, really difficult for the government.
Olivia, thanks for that. Jadita, they really are quite passionate, Rishi Sunak, about getting this over the line. And many people will say, but hang on a second, because we're talking about such small numbers of people, and there is a clause in there that many people don't even realise that actually, in return, we have to take people, some of the most vulnerable people from Rwanda, and provide kind of care and refuge to those people in return. Are you actually somebody who's on the side of the fence that thinks this whole Rwanda thing is ridiculous, or are you on the side of the fence that actually think it's worth pursuing, it is going to be an active deterrent?
I'm leaning towards the ridiculous, but not completely, because the idea of what they're doing, the formula is viable, but the country itself isn't. Because at the end of the day, when you're thinking about the way you're going to execute, you cannot then transfer the problem to Rwanda and then try to micromanage the country while they're doing it. They're autonomous in their own existence, so that what happens there is their business. You can urge them to do so, in which case you have a case of money talks, capitalism walks. Give them the financial incentive to do what you need them to do. But then the conversation back home will be, look at all the money we're pumping into getting someone to do what we want offshore. What about the problems you have at home? So then do we abandon them to the discretion of the Rwandan government? That becomes another problem. You're creating an issue you cannot control because it's at too much of a distance.
But do we just have completely different standards to other countries? Because as we've just been touching on, Rwanda and this scheme to put people in Rwanda, refugees in Rwanda, is deemed safe by other entities, by other countries. So
and I've said that because at the end of the day, there are people who live in Rwanda who are happy to live there and content to live there. So this whole narrative about you are condemning them to degradation once they cross the Atlantic to, oh, savage Africa, that is something that's antiquated and I do not like, because it speaks to tropes from a colonialist mentality. Like, Africa is not savage. We do wear clothes, we do speak English, and we are conscious and decent people. So sending them to Rwanda is not sending them to the ends of the earth. It's sending them to a different country that functions in a different way. So the way you look at a China or anywhere else, you could look at Africa if you choose to. But again, it goes to the narrative of optics. You have established something that's too ingrained to shake this quickly.
I think that's spot on, and I thought one of the most interesting interventions was from the Rwandan government in this debate, who said,
Indeed.
look at the way you're talking about us. And the rest of the British media class said, yeah, all right, thanks very much. Not very interested in your view. Let's carry on talking about you as if you're not even there.
Which shows the attitude they have to them in the first place, that you really think you can micromanage them once you've kicked the ball down the court.
And I think as well, the guy that you referenced, I think he got to the point where he was saying, if you try and push this any further, UK government, it's going to even cross the line for us, and we're going to start rejecting that policy as well. What do you make to it all at home? When you see this, the goings on in the House of Lords, then you hear people like Olivia saying, ultimately, do you know what, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because the House of Commons can basically overrule this anyway. Does that make you feel frustrated with democracy? Do you think it's all a bit of a waste of time, or do you think what's happening in the House of Lords is good, essential consideration and all the rest of it? Get in touch and let me know after the break. I want to talk to you about George Galloway. Of course, he's been sworn in as an MP today. Many people, I'm telling you, they are on the edge of a breakdown over this. Where are you on it all, and what do you think it means broadly, more broadly, for UK politics? I'll see you in 2.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Well, to cut a very long story short, I was the chaplain in a school, and people asked me to preach on how come they were told they had to accept the LGBT stuff in a Christian school. I thought that was a fair question. So I said, ultimately, no, you don't have to accept anybody else's ideas. You make up your own minds. And so on topics like the marriage being between a man and a woman, biological sex being real, gender identity not making perfect sense, therefore can't be entirely true. I said, you know, you may adopt the church's position on that and respect the people you disagree with, but you make up your own mind. For which, as you say, I was reported to Prevent, the anti-terror watchdog, secular safeguarding authorities, the Teaching Regulation Agency, Disclosure and Barring Service, all of whom eventually cleared me, but I lost my job at the school, and that's why there's legal action ongoing.
It's an incredibly powerful sermon, to be fair. What do you make of Justin Welby in his current role? I've obviously rattled off quite a few things there. I mean, you've had personal experience of feeling quite abandoned. What's your view on his position?
Well, he's doing a very difficult job, in fairness to him. My personal view is perhaps he's not doing the best job of it. I'll be diplomatic about it. In a sense, I'm on the wrong side of things as far as he's concerned, I guess. Not a word of support, not a whisper from anyone in the Church of England's hierarchy for someone simply saying, you may accept the Church of England's own teaching. And I can't quite see how he can square that in his own head, but you know, he would have to answer to that himself, I guess.
I mean, the irony is that, though this is obviously through no fault of your own, the Church of England has recently baptised people who have gone on to not just be referred to Prevent, but actually commit acts of terrorism. Meanwhile, you were referred to Prevent for essentially teaching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, my panel remain. I've got PR consultant Alex Dean and the broadcast journalist Judita De Silva. In case you have just tuned in, you've missed the first part where the House of Lords basically are voting, I've got to say, I'll summarise it by saying against the government when it comes to whether or not essentially Rwanda is a safe country. Those votes are continuing and I'll bring you the latest on them as we get them. But it's not looking good for Rishi Sunak, I can tell you. He's getting a spanking, if I am to quote, the likes of George Galloway, because, of course, you'll know what's happened today, won't you? George Galloway, he has been sworn in as an MP at the House of Commons. Listen.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
Tell you now, right, he's sent so many people into a spin. Just remind ourselves, because we've had a couple of sleeps since then, haven't we? Just remind ourselves of what he was saying when he got elected last week.
Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza. You have paid and you will pay a high price.
And do you want to remind ourselves as well of how Rishi Sunak responded to that win? Listen.
And it is beyond alarming that last night the Rochdale by-election returned a candidate who dismisses the horror of what happened on October the 7th, who glorifies Hezbollah and is endorsed by Nick Griffin, the racist former leader of the BNP.
I can tell you now, there's such a mixed bag on my inbox, because Bryson says that Galloway basically terrifies all the MPs because he cannot be bought nor bullied. Matthew says Galloway being in the Commons doesn't make one bit of difference to my life. And John says, I don't agree with George Galloway, but I've got to say he's going to liven up Parliament. He's going to keep the MPs' feet to the fire and maybe even bring them to their senses. Is George Galloway going to bring the MPs to their senses, Alex Dean?
Well, I think he's a super orator. I just disagree with everything he says. And that's the nature of democracy. Unless the election is going to be impugned, and I don't know anything about that, he won the election. So he is now, until at least the general election, the MP for that part of the world. I lament it for a couple of reasons. I lament it, first of all, because he makes very blasé generalisations and declarations. For example, when asked by another channel whether Hamas, which is a prescribed terrorist organisation in this country, should run Gaza, he said the very question was dripping with imperial condescension. Wasn't actually, it's a reasonable question. And he went on to say, I wouldn't have voted for Hamas myself, but the people picked Hamas. Well, there hasn't been an election in Gaza in 17 years. So on what basis he might feel free to declare that the people had voted for a terrorist organisation, I don't know. But people watching, this is the point, people watching without knowing that might think, here's a man who stands up to the establishment, here's a man who says it how it is, I'm for him, and if he says Hamas is OK, then Hamas is OK. He's actually a purveyor of fake news. People won't point it out in the way that I just have, but he is.
What fake news?
That Hamas is somehow the legitimate representative of the people of Gaza. You can think many things. You can believe in solidarity for Palestine. You can think that what Israel is doing is wholly wrong and still think that Hamas is the wrong organisation to be viewed as their legitimate representative.
I can tell you, you really are divided. My inbox, Heather just says, I think he's the man many have been hoping for. We're brainwashed in this country to support war, and forever war. This man is for peace, she says. What do you make to it all? I'll tell you who's coming up at 7 o'clock tonight. Nigel Farage, good evening to you. Nigel, what have you got for us?
Well, our friends at Ofcom have announced today they're launching an investigation into me because apparently I'm a politician, which means I can't cover contemporary breaking news stories. I'll be giving an answer to Ofcom live at 7 o'clock, and it will be clear, I promise you.
I will be waiting and watching that. I can tell you, Nigel, look forward to it. See you at 7 o'clock. Cool, blimey. I will come back to George Galloway in a second, but I do just want to say this whole Ofcom thing, it blows my mind how many people seem to be dedicating such a massive part of their life to getting in contact with Ofcom about our content. So many people say they don't watch the channel, but yet literally it's their favourite pastime, finding clips and desperately trying to report us to Ofcom. Goodness me. Anyway, I'm sure he will be picking up on that, as he says. But back to George Galloway. Judita, where are you on him?
I find George Galloway disturbing but fascinating in a very dysfunctional way because, like the point you've made, he's a very emotive orator, and a lot of successful politicians can motivate a lot of people by saying the right thing the right way and the wrong thing the right way, but in a compelling way. And he has the ability to do that. And what I think is most potentially threatening about him and the position he's building for himself is that at this point in time in society, there's a lot of people who will speak offline, who will speak away from a camera and say, I feel suffocated, like I can't question things, I can't challenge things, I can't express an opinion. It doesn't come from a negative place. It just, as soon as I offend someone, I'm attacked. I can't exist like that. What he's doing is showing that I am somebody that's willing to stand at the forefront and take all the slings and arrows of my righteous crusade to speak truth to power and say what I think and what I feel. And that's very inspiring to people, even if they disagree with him. So, for instance, when you're thinking about the things he said that are anti-Semitic, when people talk, there are a lot of groups, LGBTQIA+, or pro-black groups or anti-racism groups, who say that if only we had the kind of power that the Jewish community has, that they can police the way people talk about us. You get someone like George Galloway who says the wrong thing, but in a way that speaks to the desire to have similar power and influence. You've got an audience. That's why he's dangerous. He knows how to speak to people, even if he's saying something they shouldn't be listening to.
Well, I mean, what one person might deem as that's something that you shouldn't be listening to, another person would deem, actually, this is information that I really desperately want to listen to, and actually I don't get to hear in the way or form or whatever it is in current debates. Many people are saying, like Keith says, I'll say this, Michelle, at least you know exactly where he stands, what he believes in. How many politicians can you honestly say that about these days? So that agenda, the notion that actually he's got a clear agenda, and you can disagree with that agenda all you like, it's each to their own.
Well, I do.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
But you know what he is, you know where he stands, what he stands for, and you can't say that a lot about a lot of MPs.
Well, sure, but you know what you're hinting at there, it wasn't quite what your point, but what you're hinting at is the fact we get fascinated with political figures who are, with no disrespect meant to them because they're across the political spectrum, rather marginal. We get very excited about George Galloway winning one seat for the Workers' Party. I confidently predict there'll be somewhere between one seat and no seats after the general election. Equally, you were just talking to your colleague Nigel Farage. No disrespect meant to him, different part of the political spectrum to Galloway. He may or may not return to frontline politics. The media will go bananas should he do so. They'll be fascinated by it. It will be well out of proportion with any actual results for the party that he may or may not lead, which will be somewhere between 0 and 1 in terms of a 650-seat parliament. So we get very, very interested in figures who are like that. Of course, part of the reason people will be interested in reform is their prospect of depriving the Conservative Party of seats they might or might not otherwise win. That's not even the case with Galloway and the Workers' Party. And they might make a difference about in a dozen seats if they, as in dozen seats that other people might win, but not for themselves.
Well, in a second, we can hear from George Galloway, because this whole question about is he going to be a one-hit wonder, so to speak, in his by-election? Is he going to have more seats? I can tell you now, he passionately, absolutely believes that he is going to get the seats. So let's just have a listen to that.
We've got 59 parliamentary candidates ready to go, and we'll stand in, therefore, 70 Labour seats and either defeat them ourselves or cause their defeat.
See, he's not mincing his words. Let's listen to how Keir Starmer responded to that then, shall we?
Galloway only won because Labour didn't stand a candidate. I regret that we had to withdraw our candidate and apologise to voters in Rochdale. But I took that decision. It was the right decision. And when I say I've changed the Labour Party, I mean it. Obviously, we will put a first-class candidate, a unifier, before the voters in Rochdale at the general election.
Right, so, we can have this debate in a second in terms of, how effective you'll think George Galloway's party will be on a broader election. But I found Keir Starmer's response there so egotistical. When he turns around and goes, George Galloway only won because we didn't stand a candidate, and he will genuinely believe that. I kind of think, who do you think you are? That somehow that election victory was yours, but because your candidate was an absolute wrong-un and you had to withdraw him because you picked the wrong fella, that was the reason that you didn't win. I think it's so egotistical. And so many people, Jadisa, that are not massively politically engaged, this is one of the reasons why.
That's exactly the point I'm making, that George Galloway can potentially preach rhetoric that has a universal appeal for different reasons, even though it's not the agenda he's really standing on. Like you've said, just by the reaction to him, you've managed that reaction will sway people that otherwise wouldn't care for Galloway, but are anti-Starmer, towards having some option that just isn't Starmer. And that's what plays into Galloway's hands. Because at the end of the day, you've got a situation where there are a lot of people who are apathetic, that are disenchanted, that are undecided, that are in the middle, and all they need is someone who looks like they have enough motivation and enough ability to stand their ground to be effective, and that will galvanise them, and that's a dangerous thing. So thinking that George Galloway is something you can dismiss is not the wise move to make, because he has potential power in ways that you've underestimated.
It is not a role I anticipated for myself on this panel, but I want to try to be fair to Keir Starmer, because I think what he said may well be right, actually, and we'll tell, of course, come the general election whether or not he was right. I'm a Conservative, and I hope that Rochdale returns a Conservative, as I hope in every constituency. Nevertheless, I'd rather feel it's likely that, should the Labour Party get its act together, that George Galloway will enjoy 9 months in Parliament before the seat returns to the Labour Party, in which case what Keir Starmer broadly said would be broadly correct. After all, in the end, it seems to me that the Labour Party being at war to the knife in Rochdale with its ancient enemy, the Labour Party, was a big part of the reason for Galloway's success. The Labour Party, after nominations had closed, decided to disown its own candidate. Well, no one was realistically going to vote for them in those circumstances. The leader of that party is entitled to say, but for that, we would have done a lot better and perhaps won.
I've got to make the point as well, because I know some of you watching will have this opinion. There'll be many people, of course, many of them voted for George Galloway, that are so horrified and upset by the scenes coming out of Gaza. I mean, who cannot be when you see all of these children being hurt or killed or orphaned or whatever? There's so many people there that are in this camp of ceasefire now. That's what they desperately want, and they will see George Galloway as being their kind of opportunity to bring and put pressure on to change the UK position on that, perhaps. Are you one of those people, and do you think it'll be effective? And if you're not one of those people, what do you think to that? Get in touch and let me know. GBNews@gbnews.com is how you get hold of me. There's lots to talk to you about after the break. I want to ask the definition of the word extremism. What should that be? Michael Gove is looking at expanding and updating that. Tell me, and I'll see you in 2.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion.
Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Meanwhile, we've got Prince William getting on with being a real royal, or is he? I mean, this business about being ambassadorial in the Middle East, about the Gaza situation, about the Israeli situation, about trying to be friends with everyone, this is sensitive ground.
It's very demanding, I think. It must be one of the most difficult things he's ever done. He has been to Israel before and the Middle East. He was the first of the royals who went there, and he spoke to the leaders of both in Israel and on the West Bank.
Yeah.
And he managed it beautifully. He managed to carve a very sort of delicate path. I think as well, he doesn't want to cut ribbons. He doesn't want to do the ordinary things, to go round and see people and do it unless he really cares about it. This is people who are homeless. These are people who are in a war. I think he wants to go very, very high up, not for arrogance.
Make a difference in the world.
But to help, and to try and smooth things
Angela,
over.
I might be way off the mark here, but he did not, to me, look a happy man at BAFTAs on Sunday night. There was just
lonely, for sure.
Yeah, there was just something about his face that looked like I didn't want to be here.
It did. He did look lonely, but I also thought he made a huge effort so that everyone would enjoy it. He didn't want to pass it on. He doesn't use his personal feelings publicly, whereas Harry, you can tell a mile off what Harry's thinking. So he's done very well for that, and I think because he's been their president since 2010, he didn't want to let them down. Very nice of him, but he's obviously very worried about her, and he's got a lot of pressure there. I mean, he's a man with massive pressure for his father, for his wife, making sure the children are all right, and now he's taken on the Middle East, you know.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, Alex Dean remain, as does Judita De Silva. Welcome back, everybody. I can tell you now, you wouldn't expect anything less. George Galloway has really divided opinion among you guys at home. One of the things that I do think it has kind of sparked, I would say, the speech that Rishi Sunak gave on Friday that we watched live on this channel. I think that was sparked in massive part due to George Galloway. There was a bit of it that really caught my eye. Listen, I want to remind you of it.
And when these groups tell our children that they cannot and will not succeed because of who they are, when they tell children that the system is rigged against them or that Britain is a racist country, this is not only a lie, but a cynical attempt to crush young dreams and turn impressionistic minds against their own society. I stand here as our country's first non-white Prime Minister, leading the most diverse government in our country's history, to tell people of all races, all faiths and all backgrounds, it is not the colour of your skin, the God you believe in, or where you were born that will determine your success, but just your own hard work and endeavour.
So, I mean, lots of his speech caught my eye, but that particular paragraph for me, Alex, I feel like for so long now in this country, we've allowed pretty much all minority groups, basically, to batter the majority of people in this country. And basically, there's not an institution that seems to have gone untouched that's not institutionally racist or institutionally misogynist or institutionally this or institutionally that. Most people have got white privilege and everyone's an awful human being. And I think finally, you've got someone actually talking up the country and saying that you can do and be anything that you want, that as long as you're committed and you're going to persevere and all the rest of it. I just don't know why it's taken so long for Rishi Sunak to come out and talk like that?
Well, you say that about it taking the Prime Minister time. He was spurred by recent events we've been discussing for the show, but I think it's the first time any Prime Minister has talked about society like this, in quite these terms. And I think he speaks from a position of unchallengeable authority in terms of leading the most diverse governments in our history. That is a fact, and it's, in my view, a rather under-discussed one, perhaps precisely because it's a Conservative Party that forms that government. But I think the speech was about two different things. On the one hand, it was about people succeeding, whatever their backgrounds, and on the other hand, it was about extremism. And you might think those two things don't necessarily quite fit together comfortably in a speech. The part you've chosen to highlight is about people succeeding regardless of their background. And the thing about that, which the Prime Minister didn't quite say, but I have long felt, is that since time immemorial, in our best souls, we've tried to say to people, it doesn't matter, as in word of Dr. King, it's not about the colour of your skin, it's about the content of your character. But then for the first time, this generation now being raised, being told that's not true. What the most important thing is the colour of your skin, is your background. You can never escape it. You will always be defined by your race. You will always be defined by your background. You will always have this guilt with you. You will always have this privilege or underprivilege with you, and you can never escape it. And I think it's very good that the Prime Minister and the government, by implication, are combating that.
What do you think, Julita?
I think, like I always say, when you get a message, question the messenger. At the end of the day, he's unelected, so he's speaking to an experience that he hasn't exactly earned. But then the other time, I go back to
what do you mean?
When he says that the position he now occupies, he wasn't elected into that position.
Yeah, but that's our system. That is our system that we have. If you've got a leadership election, they don't have to go back to a general election.
But who knows how he would turn out if it was really put to the people for them to vote him into the position. We'll find out when it comes to an election where it really is down to the votes of the people to put him back. But the point I'm getting to is that I go back to during the COVID era where they had the Black Lives Matter protests and they were interviewing an MP and they asked him, he said, it's the most diverse government you had. And then the news broadcaster just said, are there any black people in the cabinet? And he wouldn't answer, he just kept it the most diverse, it's the most diverse. So you can't chop and change how you use that banner of definition, because at the end of the day, there is an experience that is had by the ethnic minority in Britain that is undeniable. We don't walk around saying that Britain is a racist country, no. We suffer racist experiences that have to be acknowledged. And why must we have to endure that? That is what the conversation we wish to have. It's not about branding the country. It's about saying, understand the nuances of different experiences experienced by the different peoples that occupy that country to make the country better.
Well,
but what would you...
Kemi Badenoch's black and she's in the cabinet. I don't...
Kemi Badenoch is OK, that's a different conversation we should have offline. But
you don't think she's black?
No, she is black, but Kemi Badenoch is a very specific kind of black person who rages against the black community and the perspectives in order to ingratiate herself into spaces that benefit her. A lot of people do that.
Isn't that a racist thing to say?
That is
Someone's not the right kind of black person.
No, it's not the right kind of black person. So that she occupies a certain kind of position that enables her to get certain benefits. She knows she's doing it, and she does it in the way she does it because it helps her stand out to the people that will benefit her on the path that she's chosen for herself. So it's something that happens all the time, whether it's in the Jewish community, in the black community, in the Asian community. It happens. It's something that, I want to use the terminology now, writers have written about it. We have terminology within our community for people who do that.
What's the terminology?
It's not very favourable, but we know what it is. But I'll tell you about it, but it's not favourable. I shouldn't use it on television. But the thing is that it's because it comes from something very elemental in human nature, as a survival instinct. People will make choices it's almost a crabs in the bucket mentality that they feel will benefit them, even to the detriment of the collective.
Well, let's explore this then. Let's come back to it after the break. I'll see you in 2.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
We're always told that there is a huge need for care workers in Britain. We're always told that the salaries just aren't big enough against the benefit system for British people to want to do that work. And there probably is some real truth in that. And yet, if up to 25% of those that come are acting illegally, and it would seem, up until now, that in some areas, foreign care workers come in, but bring in almost the same number of family members with them, that we need to have a proper debate about this. I'm very pleased to be joined by Mike Padgham, chair of the Independent Care Group. If I accept those arguments for a moment, how can it be that the system is so lax that up to 25% are found by the Inspector of Borders and Immigration to be working illegally.
Well, good evening to you, Nigel. It was good to join you. I mean, those figures are shocking to me. When I looked at it today, when I saw that 275 visas had been issued to a care home that didn't even exist, and a further over 1,000 people joined a company that only had previously 4 staff in it, it makes me wonder the bureaucracy of the Home Office didn't think to check that these companies exist in the first place, because it should be quite straightforward. If people are providing care, they're regulated by the Care Quality Commission. It's a simple phone call to check and double check. Sadly, there seems to have been very many loopholes at the beginning. I believe that's been tightened now, but I can't understand it, because all the providers that are doing it in the proper way have to go through quite a rigmarole to actually get approved, and it takes months. So it beggars belief that this has happened and people have been approved for a company that doesn't even exist.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Dewbs and Co. If you're just wondering what on earth's gone on in the House of Lords, long story short, the government got battered over the Rwanda bill. Doesn't really matter, though, because they'll probably overturn it when it comes back to them. But anyway, the optics are not good, and Rishi Sunak will probably be sweating a bit more tonight than he was perhaps this morning. It's not a good day for him. George Galloway continues to remain as a divisive character for all of you. But a lot of people are saying, actually, politics will finally become interesting in the UK, but interesting for the right reason or not? So that's what I'd ask you. Anyway, we're just having this conversation, this whole notion about extremism and division and all the rest of it. I played you a clip before the break of Rishi Sunak. He's saying that you've got all these groups that tell people that they won't succeed and we're a racist country and all that. So I was just applauding, basically, someone finally coming out and celebrating what's good in the country. Anyway, we're just having this conversation. Jadita, you were talking about diversity in the cabinet and why, your words, not mine, the black people that are in the cabinet are perhaps not the right kind of black people, which really stopped me in my tracks, really, because I thought that was quite a racist thing.
It's because it's not about if that's not the terminology and that's not the meaning I had. It's not that if you're a black person, you're a black person. It's the perspective, the choices, and the execution plan when it comes to occupying positions of power, because this is something that it goes back to, like I said, the elemental aspects of human nature and survival. When you're in an oppressed group or a disenfranchised group or a minority group, the desire to do something to break free of the rest will make you make choices that goes against that collective. And you see it as a singular choice, which is your right to have, but then you cannot dispute the reaction that the rest of the community has for you having made that choice.
Alex?
Well, I think his community is very proud of Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister, and he's a person of an ethnic minority, so is Suella Braverman. And if you want to talk specifically black, I mentioned Kemi Badenoch before the break, and you didn't say she was the wrong type of black person. You said she was a very specific type of black person. If I choose, so James Cleverly, of course, another black person in the cabinet. Perhaps the most interesting example, because the career has come to fruition, is Kwasi Kwarteng, who became our first black Chancellor, not very, very long. But, of course, he rose in the Conservative Party on perceived merit, and he fell very quickly on perceived merit, or however people would judge that performance. And there is somebody whose political career rose and fell within the party to which I belong, based on what the perceptions of his merit were. And I would say that's a good thing in British society. But my point is, if you You can, of course, say that the Prime Minister and Suella Braverman are not specifically black, but Kemi Badenoch is, James Cleverly is, the former Chancellor is. I mean, you start picking up these examples of people serving in ethnic minorities, and the Prime Minister's point about the diversity of the Cabinet is right, isn't it?
No, but then I'm actually really glad that you made that comparison about Rishi Sunak and his community is proud of him. All you need to do is just scratch the surface and investigate what the general black community feels about Kwasi Kwarteng and Kemi Badenoch, and there you'll see where the cracks lie that I have described. Because, like I said, the Asian experience is not the same as the black experience.
No,
the black experience is not the same as the Far Eastern experience. That is why we feel that tarring us with the same brush and saying that we're calling the country racist, we should be grateful or go back, that's what creates a problem. Because if you listen to the nuances of conversation, when black people talk about institutional racism and Black Lives Matter, we're saying that, identify that we have to endure certain lived experiences, that if only you would engage with us in a form of understanding, it could be recalibrated and be different for us.
And you have a life experience that I don't have in this country. But interestingly, I don't think you're suggesting that I fail to recognise those things. I think you're saying that the black people we're discussing in government fail to recognise that.
And so basically telling us as a collective that, well, we've elected a black person, you should be grateful, isn't the remedy.
Blimey, what do you make to all of that? I'm sure some strong opinions will be had at home. Get in touch and let me know. Don't forget Nigel Farage. He is after the break at 7 o'clock tonight. He wants to talk all things Ofcom. You know, when I was on air on Friday, a campaign group was emailing many of my viewers who were on their database, telling them that they should come together, get in touch with Ofcom and petition to close us down. I don't mean to be rude, but I certainly think that some people need to get a life. Goodness me. Anyway, Alex Dean, thank you very much for your company. Judita De Silva, thank you too for yours. As always, thank you for all of your company at home. It's never a dull day, is it, in British politics? Tomorrow is going to be no different, and I'll be back then. But for now, Nigel Farage, night-night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, welcome along to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Bit of fog forming overnight, wet weather's pushing its way northwards, and then tomorrow, well, a few showers, but for many it's going to be a fine day. Far from fine out there this evening though. Low pressure has been moving in, bringing some wet weather across the southwest, and these weather fronts continue to track north overnight. Nothing too heavy for most, but a damp, dank kind of night as it turns quite misty and murky, a few fog patches around. Touch of frost possible through parts of Wales and southwest England. Most towns and cities holding a couple of degrees above freezing, but nevertheless a chilly start, certainly across the Midlands. And it will be quite murky here, some fog patches for central and eastern parts of England, rain and drizzle over eastern England, and